Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we'll be discussing the Rambam Hilchot Pesulei HaMukdashin, Perik Yud Tes, Halacha Yud Gimel, and Halacha Yud Daled. The Rambam says as follows: Kolanik Barin Afran Asa. Any substance that the Torah requires burial, or the sages require burial, if one had burnt them, the ashes cannot be used for anything. Their ashes are forbidden to derive benefit from. However, B'chol HaNisrafim Shel Hegdish Afran Mutar. All things that belong to the Beis HaMikdash that one is not allowed to derive benefit from, and they have to be burnt, their ashes are permissible. And the Rambam gives some exceptions. Halacha Yudalad, he continues, Kol HaNisrafim Lo Yichberu. All those things that have to be burnt should not be buried. V'chein Kol HaNikbarin Lo Yisafru. Likewise, anything that has to be buried should not be burnt. Why? What's wrong with burning? Burning is even more destructive than burial. So the Rambam anticipates that question, and he answers, and even though he's being more stringent by burning the forbidden substance rather than just burying it, where it's not totally destroyed, Heschel be Afron, but then you'll be lenient about the ashes, and the ashes of those things that have to be buried are forbidden. So if a person takes something that has to be buried, which means that even if it's burnt, you can't use the ashes, he shouldn't burn it, because then there's the possibility that he may derive benefit from the ashes which are forbidden. That's how Rashi, Masechta Tzmura, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, that's how he explains the reason why things that are buried should not be burned, because the person might come to benefit from the ashes. So the question is asked by the Magen Avraham, Chaim Simin Tov Mem Hey. He says, the Rambam in Hilchos Chametz and Matzah paskins, how do we destroy Chametz? He says, Sarfa, you burn it, or you crumble it and scatter it to the wind, or Mata Layama, throw it into the sea. In other words, there's machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. How do you destroy Chametz? Rabbi Yehuda says you have to burn it. Chachamim says, no, you can do anything you want to destroy it. It doesn't have to be burnt. In other words, Chametz is in the category of Kol HaNikbarin, things that are essentially buried, in which case the ashes are forbidden. If that's the case, how could the Rambam allow the burning of the chametz if he paskins like the chachamim that chametz is not min hanisrafim? So you want to be machmer, but you can't be machmer. We just learned over here that the chumrah is not a legitimate chumrah because you might come to derive benefit from the ashes. Magen Avraham and the Alter Rebbe and Heschel answer that the only reason that the Rambam holds that you're not allowed to bury things that have to be, you're not allowed to burn things that have to be buried, is only if your kavanah, if your intention is to derive benefit from the ashes. But if that's not your intention, you don't plan to derive benefit from the ashes, then you're allowed to burn it, and there's no gzeira. There's no, unlike Rashi, who says that there's a gzeira, maybe you'll benefit from it. The Rambam doesn't hold from that. The Rambam holds that if something has to be buried, you shouldn't burn it because your intention is to derive benefit. So that's wrong. But if your intention is not to derive benefit, then why not be machmer and burn the chametz or whatever other substance is forbidden to derive benefit from? However, other Acharonim, the Abnei Miluyim, Rabbi Kiva Eger, Teres Chesed, all come to a different conclusion. And they say, what's the reason why things that are to be burnt, you're allowed to derive benefit from the ashes, whereas things that have to be buried, you can't derive benefit from the ashes? What's the logic behind that? The logic is that when you do something that the Torah mandates, you fulfill the mitzvah of destroying. Once you fulfill the mitzvah, then there's no more an issue. The Torah doesn't keep the prohibition of deriving benefit on something that one has already fulfilled his obligation. So if something has to be burnt, that means the Torah requires burning. So once the burning is completed and there is ashes, there's no problem anymore. You did the mitzvah already. But if something has to be buried, that means in the Torah you don't have to destroy it. In the Torah, there's no mitzvah of destroying it. Chachamim said you should bury it. But there's no inherent prohibition and there's no requirement to bury it min Torah. So there's no mitzvah. So if there's no mitzvah, then there's no limit to the prohibition of deriving benefit. As long as there's still something left over, even if it's ashes, the prohibition still remains. That's true in general cases. But chametz is different because everyone agrees, even the chachamim who say that you don't have to burn it, you could bury it or destroy it by crumbling it and throwing it into the sea. They hold that that's a mitzvah min Torah. That's the Torah's mandating it to be destroyed. The only question is, how do you have to destroy it? But since there's a mitzvah to destroy the chametz, according to all opinions, it's unlike the cases of kol hanikbara and things that have to be buried, which are only buried with the rabbanon, that you shouldn't come to stumble and use it. But there's no inherent mitzvah in destroying it, and therefore the heter of deriving benefit doesn't apply there. When chametz it does apply, because everyone agrees that when you destroy the chametz, either way, burning or destroying it some other way, you fulfilled a mitzvah. And once you fulfill the mitzvah, the ashes are no longer forbidden.